Chapter 26 of Character Building. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A recording by Luke Sartor. Character Building by Booker T. Washington. Chapter 26. Individual Responsibility. I have referred in a general way before this, when I have been speaking to you, to the fact that each one of you ought to feel an interest in whatever task is set for you to do here, over and above the mere bearing which that task has on your own life. I wish to speak more specifically tonight on this subject, on what I may term the importance of your feeling a sense of personal responsibility, not only for the successful performance of every task set you, but for the successful outcome of every worthy undertaking with which you come in contact. You ought to realize that your actions will not affect yourselves alone. In this age it is almost impossible for a man to live for himself alone. On every side our lives touch those of others. Their lives touch ours. Even if it were possible to live otherwise, few would wish to. A narrow life, a selfish life, is almost sure to be not only unprofitable, but unhappy. The happy people and the successful people are those who go out of their way to reach and influence for good as many persons as they can. In order to do this, though, in order best to fit oneself to live this kind of life, it is important that certain habits be acquired, and an essential one of these is the habit of realizing one's responsibility to others. Your actions will affect other people in one way or another, and you will be responsible for the result. You ought always to remember this, and govern yourselves accordingly. Suppose it is the matter of the recitation of a lesson, for instance. Someone may say, "It is nobody's business but my own if I fail in a recitation. Nobody will suffer but me." This is not so. Indirectly, you injure your teacher also, for while a conscientious, hard-working teacher ought not to be blamed for the failures of pupils who do not learn simply because they do not want to, or are too lazy to try, it is generally the case that a teacher's reputation gains or loses as his or her class averages high or low, and each failure in recitation, for whatever cause, brings down the average. Then too, you are having an influence upon your classmates, even if it be unconscious. There is hardly ever a student who is not observed by someone at some time as an example. "There is such a boy," some other student says to himself. "He has failed in class ever so many times, and still he gets along. It can't make much difference if I fail once." And as a result he neglects his duty and does fail. The same thing is true of work in the industrial departments. Too many students try to see how easily they can get through the day, or the work period, and yet not get into trouble. Or even if they take more interest than this, they care for their work only for the sake of what they can get out of it for themselves, either as pay or as instruction, which will enable them to work for pay at some later time. Now there ought to be a higher impulse behind your efforts than that. Each student ought to feel that he or she has a personal responsibility to do each task in the very best manner possible. You owe this not only to your fellow students, your teachers, the school, and the people who support the institution, but you owe it even more to yourselves. You owe it to yourselves because it is right and honest, because nothing less than this is right and honest, and because you never can be really successful and really happy until you do study and work and live in this way. I have been led to speak specifically on this subject tonight on account of two occurrences here which have come to my notice. One of these illustrates the failure on the part of students to feel this sense of responsibility to which I have referred. The other affords an illustration of the possession by a student of a feeling of personal interest and personal responsibility, which has been very gratifying and encouraging. The first incident, I may say, occurred some months ago. It is possible that the students who were concerned in it may not be here now, or, if they are, that it would not happen again. I certainly hope not. A gentleman who had been visiting here was to go away. He left word at the office of his wish, saying that he planned to leave town on the 5 o'clock train in the afternoon. A boy was sent from the office early in the afternoon with a note to the barn, ordering a carriage to take this gentleman and his luggage to the station. 4:30 came, and the man had his luggage brought down to the door of the building in which he had been staying, so as to be ready when the team came. But no team came. The visitor finally became so anxious that he walked over to the barn himself. Just as he reached the barn, he met the man who was in charge there, with the note in his hand. The note had only just that moment reached this man, and of course no carriage had been sent, because the first person who felt that he had any responsibility in the matter had only just learned that a carriage was wanted. The boy who had brought the note had given it to another boy, and he to someone else, and he, perhaps, to someone else. At any rate, it had been delayed because no one had taken enough interest in the errand to see that whatever business the note referred to received proper attention. This occurred, as I have said, several months ago, before the local train here went over to Cheehaw to meet all of the trains. It happened that this particular passenger was going north, and it was possible by driving to Cheehaw for him to get there in time to take the northbound train. If he had been going the other way, though, towards Montgomery, he would have lost the train entirely, and, as chanced to be the case, would have been unable to keep a very important engagement. As it was, he was obliged to ride to Cheehaw in a carriage, and the time of a man and a team, which otherwise would have been saved, was required to take him there. Now when such a thing as this happens, no amount of saying, "I am sorry," by the person or persons to blame will help the matter any. It is too late to help it then. The thing to do is to feel some responsibility in seeing that things are done right yourself. Take enough interest in whatever you are engaged in to see that it is going to come out in the end just as nearly right, just as nearly perfect as anything you can will go towards making it right or perfect. And if the task or errand passes out of your hands before it is completed, do not feel that your responsibility in the matter ends until you have impressed it upon the mind and heart of the person to whom you turn over the further performance of the duty. The world is looking for men and women who can tell one why they can do this thing or that thing, how a certain difficulty was surmounted or a certain obstacle removed. But the world has little patience with the man or woman who takes no real interest in the performance of a duty, or who runs against a snag and gets discouraged, and then simply tells why he did not do a thing, and gives excuses instead of results. Opportunities never come a second time, nor do they wait for our leisure. The years come to us but once, and they come then only to pass swiftly on, bearing the ineffaceable record we have put upon them. If we wish to make them beautiful years or profitable years, we must do it moment by moment as they glide before us. The other case to which I have referred is pleasanter to speak about. One day this spring, after it had got late enough in the season, so that it was not as a general thing necessary to have fires to heat our buildings, a student passing Phelps Hall noticed that there was a volume of black smoke pouring out of one of the chimneys there. Some boys might not have noticed the smoke at all. Others would have said that it came from the chimney. Still others would have said that it was none of their business anyway, and would have gone along. This boy was different. He noticed the smoke, although he saw that it came from the chimney, and if so was probably no sign of harm. He felt that any smoke at all there at that time was such an unusual thing that it ought to be investigated, for fear it might mean danger to the building. He was not satisfied until he had gone into the building and had inspected every floor clear up to the attic, to see that the chimney and the building were not in danger. As it happened, the janitor had built a fire in the furnace in the basement for some reason, so that the young man's anxiety, fortunately, was unfounded. But I am heartily glad he had such an anxiety, and that he could not rest until he found out whether there was any foundation for it or not. I shall feel that all of our buildings are safer for his being here, and when he graduates and goes away, I hope he will leave many others here who will have the same sense of personal responsibility which he had. Let me tell you, here and now, that unless you young men and young women come to have this characteristic, your lives are going to fall far short of the best and noblest achievement possible. We frequently hear the word lucky used with reference to a man's life. Two boys start out in the world at the same time, having the same amount of education. When 20 years have passed, we find one of them wealthy and independent. We find him a successful professional man with an assured reputation, or perhaps at the head of a large commercial establishment employing many men, or perhaps a farmer owning and cultivating hundreds of acres of land. We find the second boy, grown now to be a man, working for perhaps $1 or $1.50 a day, and living from hand to mouth in a rented house. When we remember that the boys started out in life equal-handed, we may be tempted to remark that the first boy has been fortunate, that fortune has smiled on him, and that the second has been unfortunate. There is no such nonsense as that. When the first boy saw a thing that he knew he ought to do, he did it, and he kept rising from one position to another until he became independent. The second boy was an eye servant who was afraid that he would do more than he was paid to do. He was afraid that he would give 50 cents worth of labor for 25 cents. He watched the clock for fear that he would work 1 minute past 12 o'clock at noon and past 6 o'clock at night. He did not feel that he had any responsibility to look out for his employer's interests. The first boy did $1 worth of work for 50 cents. He was always ready to be at the store before time, and then, when the bell rang to stop work, he would go to his employer and ask him if there was not something more that ought to be done that night before he went home. It was this quality in the first boy that made him valuable and caused him to rise. Why should we call him fortunate or lucky? I think it would be much more suitable to say of him, he is responsible. End of chapter 26. Individual Responsibility. Recording by Luke Sartor, Griffith, New South Wales. Chapter 27 of Character Building. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Luke Sartor. Character Building by Booker T. Washington. Chapter 27. Getting On in the World. It is natural and praiseworthy for a person to be looking for a higher and better position than the one he occupies. So long as a man does his whole duty in what he is engaged in, he is not to be condemned for looking for something better to do. Now the question arises, how are you going to put yourself in a condition to be in demand for these higher and more important positions? In the first place, you should be continually on the lookout for for opportunities to improve yourselves in your present work. You should be constantly on the lookout for chances to make yourselves more valuable to your present employer and more efficient in your work for him. Suppose you are engaged in the work of milking cows. I think it better to talk of practical things with which you all are acquainted, although I know that many of you boys had rather I would tell you how to go to Congress than how to become successful milkers. Inasmuch, though, as I suspect a good many more of us will have to milk cows than go to Congress, I think it will not hurt us to talk about milking. If the boy who milks cows now does that thoroughly, by doing it he may lay the foundation to go to Congress later. The point is that we want to be constantly on the lookout for ways of improving whatever work we are engaged in, whether that work be milking cows or doing something else. In whatever you are doing, there are a great many improvements which you want to become acquainted with. If your work is dairying, read the dairy journals. Get hold of every book or paper that you can which has anything to do with your line of work. Be sure that you know all, or as nearly as possible, all there is to know about milking cows. And then don't be content with what you get out of books and newspapers, for that information is only the result of some other person's experience. By conversing with intelligent and experienced persons, and by your own experiments, you can get much valuable information about your work. Never get to the point where you are ashamed to ask somebody else for information. The ignorant man will always be ignorant if he fears that by asking for information he will betray his lack of knowledge. Know all there is to be known about the position you occupy, but ever feel that there is more for you to learn. There is no person who makes himself of so little use in the world as the one who feels that he knows all there is to be known about his work. If you are milking cows, and feel that you know all there is to be known about that subject, you have simply reached a point where you are practically useless and unfitted for the work. Feel that you can always learn something from somebody else. It is a mark of intelligence to learn, even from the humblest person. I do not mean for you always to put into practice every suggestion that is made to you, or to agree with every statement made to you, but listen to what people say, weigh their plans alongside of your own, and then profit by the one which you are convinced is the best. Persevere in such conversation, and in reading. You will constantly be surprised to find how little you really know about your work, and how much more somebody else knows about it than you do. You want to get to the point where you can anticipate the wants of your employer. In this way, you will make yourself of great service to him. You do not know how vexing and discouraging it is to a man to be compelled to say every morning to those in his employ, "Do this at 9 o'clock, and that at 12 o'clock, and the other at 5. Or how pleasant it is to have a person with whom you come in contact anticipate the needs of the man who employs him. Then you can make yourself valuable and in demand, just in proportion as you consider that the work you are performing is your own. Do not consider that it is being performed for a certain man or a particular organization. Make haste and get to the point where you can feel that everything connected with the shop in which you work, or in the office, or in the stable, is under your care, and that you alone are responsible for it. If you are at the head of a stable or barn, plan day by day how you can best provide for the well-being of your cows and horses. When you make yourself master of these humble positions, you will find that the calls to higher places will come to you. The men you see spending most of their times looking for higher and more lucrative positions are, 9 times out of 10, men who have made worthless failures in other places. End of chapter 27. Getting on in the world. Recording by by Luke Sartor, Griffith, New South Wales. Chapter 28 of Character Building. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Luke Sartor. Character Building by Booker T. Washington. Chapter 28. Each one his part. I desire to call your attention for a few minutes tonight to the fact that one thing is dependent for success upon another. One individual is dependent for success upon another. One family in a community upon other families for their mutual prosperity. One part of a state upon the other parts for the successful government of the state. The same thing is true in nature. One thing cannot exist unless another exists, cannot succeed without the success of something else. The very forces of nature are dependent upon other forces for their existence. Without vegetable life, we could not have animal life. Without mineral life, we could not have vegetable life. So, throughout all kinds of life, as throughout the life of nature, everything is dependent upon something else for its success. The same thing is true of this institution and of every institution. The success of the whole depends upon having every person connected with the institution do his or her whole duty. We are very apt to get the idea that there are high positions and that there are low positions, that there is important service and unimportant service. But I believe that God expects the same amount of conscientious work from a person in a low position as from one in a high position, that He expects the same conscientious service, whether the work be a big task or a little one. We are dependent as an institution, every institution is dependent, for success upon the individual consciences of those connected with it as teachers and students. And there is nothing that gives me more satisfaction and pleasure, and more faith in the future of the school, than to see examples of conscientious work here. I remember a special instance of this kind that occurred at one of our commencements. I believe that commencement, more than any other time in the school year, is an occasion where there is excitement and a desire to witness the exercises. After the exercises of that year were over, I had occasion to go to the dining room, and I found there one of the teachers who from her appearance I thought had not attended the exercises. When I asked her about this, she said, "No, I intended to go, but at the last minute I saw that there were some dishes here that needed to be washed, and I stayed here to see that they were washed." Now that was one of the finest exhibitions of conscientious regard for duty that I ever saw. And there are very few persons who would have done a thing like that. That we have teachers here whose hearts are so much in their work that they are willing to do such things as this, gives me great faith in the future of this school as the years go on. It takes a person with a conscience, when there are public men of note here, a great many strangers and many things to attract attention, to be so mindful of her duty that she will stay behind and wash dishes when everyone else is in attendance upon the exercises and seeking enjoyment. When the people connected with this institution can bring themselves up to that point, I have no fear for the success of the institution, and it can succeed only as they do bring their consciences up to that point. If I were to ask you individually as students to deliver an address upon this platform, or to read an essay, I should not be at all afraid that you would fail. I believe that you would carefully prepare that address or essay. You would look up all the references necessary in order to give you what information you needed, and then you would get up here and speak or read successfully. I feel sure that I would hear something that I should not be ashamed of. The average man and woman do succeed when before the public. But where I fear for your success is when you come to the performance of the small duties, the duties which you think no one else will know about, the things which no one will see you do. It is when you think that no one is going to see you washing dishes or getting dirt out of crevices that I am afraid you are going to fail. I remember that some time ago, when I was travelling in a buggy from one New England village to another, after we had gone some miles on our way, the young man who was driving me stopped the horse and got out. I asked him what was the matter, and he said that something was the matter with the harness. I looked with all the eyes I had, and yet I could see nothing at fault. Still, the man mended a piece of harness that he said was not as it should be. It had not seemed to me that this fault in the harness had been irritating the horse or hindering him from going so fast as he ought. But after it had been repaired, I could see a difference for the better. That, to my mind, was a great lesson. It taught me how the people of New England have educated their consciences, so that they cannot allow themselves to let even the smallest thing go undone, or be improperly done. It is this trait in the New England character that has come to make the very name itself of that part of the country a synonym for success. Don't we wish that we had 100 such men as that driver here? If I could put my hand on 1,000 such persons as that, we could find employment for all of them as soon as they got their diplomas. One learns to judge persons by their character in this respect. Not long ago I had an opportunity to go through the jail of this county. As the sheriff showed me through the building, I was impressed to see how clean everything was, and I noticed that the man who seemed to be the janitor of the jail, although he too was a prisoner, seemed to take a great deal of pride in showing me the cleanness of the corners and the general good appearance of the place. He seemed to put his whole heart into the keeping of that jail clean. "Who is that man?" I asked the sheriff, after we had got out of the janitor's hearing. "He is a prisoner," the sheriff replied, "but I believe he is innocent. I do not believe that a man can be so honest and faithful about his work and be guilty of a crime. When I see how well he does his work here, notwithstanding the fact that he is shut up here in prison, I believe that he is an honest man and deserves his freedom." In plain words, then, the problem we must work out here is not, can you master algebra or literature? We know you can do that. We know you can master the sciences. The general problem we have to work out here, and work it out with fear and trembling, is, can we educate the individual conscience? Can we so educate a group of students that there will be in every one of them a conscience on which we can depend? Can we educate a class of girls here who will not be satisfied, when sweeping their rooms, to make the middle of the rooms look clean, but leave a trail of dirt in the corners and under the furniture? Will they see to it that everything is properly cleaned and put in its appropriate place? Can we educate a class of young men who will do their duty on the farm as they would do it on this platform? Can we educate your consciences so that you will do certain things, not because it is the rule that they should be done, but because they should be done? These are the problems we must work out here. End of chapter 28. Each one his part. Recording by Luke Sartor, Griffith, New South Wales.